everyone. I am Beth Adams, ALTSA's Lean Continuous Improvement Manager. ALTSA, or Aging and Long-Term Support Administration, is within the Department of Social and Health Services. As we go through our presentation today, our time together, please feel free to ask questions along the way. I might hold off on answering if it is something that will be covered later on. Talia and Teresa know that they can interrupt me as I'm talking, so feel free to, put questions in the chat or Q&A, whatever is easiest for you. And after seeing those statistics, it's like, ooh, I have a lot to live up to in terms of engagement and applicability to your work and just usefulness of information. And what better way really to talk about data visualization or data viz than starting off here on the screen with a Venn diagram showing data viz as the trifecta of data, the narrative, or that is the story behind the data, and then a visual representation of the data. But communicating data effectively is more than creating fancy charts. It's also about knowing the right information to share, in what way, and to whom, how often. And really, no matter what our role is, knowing how to understand and then explain data is going to make you stand out. And part of a lean culture is really to make data visual. Visual storytelling helps to enhance the message we want to convey. It's useful to accompany long narrative, and it can simplify complex ideas and statistics. So to assist with putting together your story, I've created a participant workbook to accompany this presentation. I would encourage you to open it up if you are able, because we are at different points throughout the time together. Pause the presentation, go to the workbook, and I'll walk through the corresponding selection or section, talking about ways that you could use this tool. And don't worry if you don't have enough time during our time together to complete the workbook. This is just really a tool for you to use, for your team to use, as you move forward in working with your own data. So just a little bit about me. I'm a social gerontologist, master's in gerontology, Lean Six Sigma black belt. And I'm someone, I love taking large amounts of information and putting it together in an user-friendly format. But even more than that, I also love helping others to do the same. Especially, in a social service environment where I've spent my entire career. Data visualization isn't something that they really teach us in school. People often ask how I get started in this and if I've had formal training. And I'm mostly self-taught. I look at what others do. I follow a couple of blogs, read books, articles. But with just sort of the way my brain works, I'm fortunate to have both that analytical, critical thinking side and also the artistic eye. But I'm always learning, seeking new ways to present data effectively. So before we get started, let's take a poll. I am curious to know sort of just where we're at as a group with this topic. Teresa, if you're able to launch that poll, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so when it comes to this topic, I don't even know where to get started. I know a little bit, but I'm not confident in my skills. I'm confident with chart graph creation, but I'm not sure I'm telling the right story. I'm pretty confident with chart graph creation and telling my story, but I could always use a refresher. Or maybe I could always teach this session. Teresa, when it looks like we've got, a good 90% participation, if you're able to share the results, that would be greatly appreciated. And I just want to acknowledge that wherever you're at, it's okay. It's a continuum, it's a path, it's a journey. We're always, even myself, when I took the survey and I checked number 4, I'm confident, but I could always learn more. Okay, great. So it looks like we have just a really nice bell curve with 38% know a little bit, but I'm not confident in my skills. And then 25% confident, not sure I'm telling the right story, or could use a refresher. It looks like probably at least one person, maybe two, let's see, or maybe 4, 5, I have to see how many people we have, 140, could probably teach this session. So know that I believe in participatory learning. So if you have something that you want to share, a tip, a trick that works for you, I welcome that input. So feel free to drop that into the chat. So let's type into the chat your response to this. When I think of data visualization, I think of, and let's see what people are saying. Okay, we have charts, graphs, Python. Ooh, there's a power user. Power BI, pivot tables. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. PowerPoint, overview, charts, colors, pivot tables, telling a story, PowerPoints, pivot tables, dashboards, charts, dashboards, Tableau. Yeah, for some, this is overwhelming. It's it's the dreaded math and statistics for some. Clarity. Oh, I like that. Are we on track or off track? Yeah, answers, storytelling, accountability. Oh, I love all these responses. Dashboards. An Excel guy. Oh yeah, Stephanie Evergreen. She is someone, one of the blogs that I follow is hers. Ooh, less emotion, more fact. Transparency. Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. Everything that you shared is accurate. It conveys different things to different people. It creates different emotions in different, for those of us that are like, ooh, I got to create a graph and chart. And then you have, the others that are just like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed. I don't even want to think about this. So for those that are sort of on the, I don't really want to think about this, hopefully by the end of today, you'll feel a little bit more empowered, or at least have some ideas and some tips to assist you in using data that you have access to and telling your story. So today we're going to talk just a little bit about what data is, how it's categorized, spend some time, what are the components of data visualization and telling our story? And then at the end, depending on where we're at with time, sharing some examples of different types of charts and graphs. And then the objective that you'll walk away with a framework for telling a specific story using the provided handout. It doesn't mean that you're going to complete your story. It just means that you have a framework for putting it together, or at least thinking about how you might put your data together. So let's go ahead and get started. So data visualization is really about how to transform numbers into a narrative. Your narrative to accompany your graphic or chart includes what happened or is happening, what it means, why it matters, and then what we want our audience to do with that information. So data can be complicated and overwhelming, but making it visual increases its value. It helps to strengthen the impact of your message for your audience. It also enables us to comprehend large amounts of data at a glance and to see the meaning behind the numbers. And it also can promote compelling storytelling. Because data on its own is not as impactful or as easy to interpret. And when in a complex table, the one here on the slide is a very simple one, it can be hard to easily compare or make sense of what is happening. On the other hand, graphics on their own are insufficient. Like, okay, you see a pie chart here and there's or a donut and there's like something happening. One is greater than the other, but you don't know what. So you need some text to complement your graphic. So I'm curious, if you were given the responsibility of creating a report, which do you think your audience would prefer, the table or the chart? type your response into the chat. If I'm seeing chart, depends on the audience, but yeah, definitely lots leaning toward the chart. Both. Yeah, and there is a case for having both. Depending on your audience, sometimes also for accessibility, having a simple table is easier for those that have screen readers, especially to rely on being able to understand what is happening. Yeah, and then just, yeah, in the chart for accessibility, I lean towards the table. So visual storytelling also helps to promote retention. For those of us that have our site, the largest amount of data, roughly 90%, enters our brain. And it can also improve learning by up to 400%. But visual storytelling also recognizes different learning styles and abilities. Um, Using visuals and graphics, including charts, really help to enhance our learning styles. It's that blend of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So real quickly, visual, learn what they see. So it's illustrations, charts, graphs, articles. And 60% of people identify as visual learners. Most of us are a blend. Auditory, learn what they hear. So oral presentation and discussion. And then our kinesthetic learners, learn what they do. So note taking or the actual creation of the chart and graph. And visual storytelling, really blending the narrative with the numbers. It's more inclusive for those who are neurodivergent, as long as it's not too busy. And then finally, visual storytelling really just helps to enhance clarity and minimize confusion. With clarity, we can focus on what's important and then act accordingly. Visual data also just makes it easier to digest information. It's a quick and easy way to understand numeric information. It can make patterns and trends easier to see. And for most people, let's face it, it's just more exciting. Okay, so before we can display our data or create the right chart and graph, we need to understand the types and where it comes from. So I like this quote by W. Edward Deming. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So categories. At the highest level, data is first broken down into one of two categories. Broadly speaking, you have your qualitative and your quantitative. Qualitative, this is your categorical data. It describes the qualities and characteristics of something. It's non-statistical. Examples of sources include open-ended responses on surveys, focus groups, interviews, observations. Qualitative data is really useful when you need to understand the why. Quantitative data, on the other hand, this is data that can be counted, measured, or expressed in numbers. There is a quantity of something. And for some, this is the dreaded math and statistics. But results are easy to summarize, compare, and track changes over time. Examples include surveys, polls, and assessment data. It focuses on the what is being measured and how many. And when talking about data today, we're primarily going to be focusing on quantitative data. Now, you can ask the same question to either elicit a qualitative or quantitative response. Really, how you structure the question and whether you provide just an open text box response or provide a range of possible response options, it's going to determine the type of data you'll get. Several months ago, a friend shared that they saw a meme that described qualitative data as being feely and quantitative data as being numbery. And I thought that was just, I really appreciated his sharing that with me because it really does get at the root of the two different categories of data. And then within the quantitative category, it can be further broken down to discrete or continuous. So discrete, these are things that can't be measured. It's sort of like a ball. You can't divide a ball. You either have a ball or no ball. A group of balls for the same sport or different sports might have different shapes and sizes. An example of discrete would be the number of people who took a survey. Continuous, on the other hand, this is data that can be measured. I think of a ruler. It has a range of possibilities. Each can be divided into smaller and smaller units. Examples of continuous would include travel expenses pre-pandemic versus now. I know for my agency, it's significantly less now than it was 3 years ago. But before I move on, I just want to check in and see if there are any questions.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but
All
if you have
right.
a good question, feel free to unmute.
So now that we kind of know where the types of data, oh, perhaps discrete can have subgroups. Yes, discrete can have subgroups, but those subgroups can't be further divided. So it could be, I would think of like affinity grouping. You can create smaller and smaller groups. But in terms of like, you can't divide, you can't have 1.5 people take a survey. You're either going to have a full person take a survey or not take a survey. Does that help just uh, address that discrete? If it doesn't, feel free to reach out to me afterwards too.
Yeah, it looks like she
Um,
said yes.
all right, cool. But also understanding where our data comes from is important. Um, Business systems. So depending on where you work, it could be a small handful of business systems to several that are very division specific. These are generally going to be managed by IT or depending on where your IT is, it could be a state system or it could be an agency specific system. Surveys, whether it's client or customer surveys, employee engagement surveys. I know we just finished up the biannual employee engagement survey. So I always enjoy seeing those results when they come out. And then other sources. So it could be like a SharePoint site or a SharePoint list that is specific to your unit or program. Lean events create lots of data. You think about a root cause problem solving event of all the data and information that comes out of that. And then some could be self-created. Um, I know for me, because of the nature of my work, I created a tracker. This here is the shell for my own tracking system. It's based in Excel, and then I have it connected to pivot tables. And then I have basically a dashboard that I can update that just shows the number of projects that I'm working on, the types, where my customer comes from, and the status of that. Yeah, speaking of surveys, Teresa just dropped the one in for this meeting. And then we have the platforms for how we calculate, display, and collect the data. I'm including those that are free to everyone across the state. So our Microsoft, our basic systems, Excel, data tables provided by surveys, or our own data entry. From here, individuals can create their own pivot tables from any Excel table or spreadsheet. They're one of my favorite things to play around with. You can also use Excel for creating A3s and value stream maps. PowerPoints, again, plugging in charts and graphs. The root of those is Excel, using presentations to tell your story. And then A3s, smart art, charts and graphs. Word, same thing, reports, you can add in charts and graphs. That's an Excel plugin. And again, as with Excel and PowerPoint, you can use it for creating A3s if you don't have access to other platforms, SmartArt, charts, value stream maps, SharePoint, collecting and gathering data via forms, surveys, lists, It's great for team and project communication and tracking. And then Teams itself. You can do polls within meetings, forms, which is a survey. And both are really easy to use, set up. And one of the great things about a Teams form is that it automatically graphs the data for you. So if you're just like, yeah, I don't want to mess around with that, the Teams form survey is a great tool to use. And then depending on the nature of your work, other tools and platforms could include Power BI. This is generally free and doesn't require an additional license. Visio, it does require an additional license. And then depending on, I saw, I think Tableau mentioned in the chat earlier, when you think of data viz, other platforms could be R, SSPS, or other specialty platforms for more advanced data analysis. Power BI is at its best when it's integrated with other sources so that it's automated. You can upload data from an Excel document or do manual entry, but I find it clunky to use in that way. So really, again, it's at its best when it's integrated with other business systems. And then Visio, I love using it for process mapping, value stream mapping, or other diagram-based charts. So in addition to having a basic understanding of our data types, we need to also identify where our data comes from. And that includes how data is entered and retrieved. You might be asking yourself, well, why is this important? Well, part of it is that it speaks to the credibility and reliability of our data. So, basically good data in, good data out. Some examples of manual entry and retrieval include filling out a form or setting up a pivot table from an Excel spreadsheet. I can't talk today. Maybe manually exporting data from a business system or a SharePoint list. Some of the cons of manual entry and retrieval is that it's time consuming. It's duplicative, can be unnecessary, and creates more room for error. And then automated examples include, if you've manually set up, say, cellular references in Excel, it is now automatically entered, or any interface between business systems. And then another automated example of automated retrieval is integration between Power BI and a given business system. Tons of automated is that it's not always feasible. It can be expensive, also be highly technical, requiring a pretty high degree of expertise to implement. And also just because it can be done doesn't mean it's feasible or feasible given available resources. Okay, so we're going to pause and go to our workbook. As we start to look at the workbook, and thank you for dropping that into the chat again. It's really just intended as a guide to help create a framework for telling your data story. You can use it as is, or just use the prompts to help you determine who needs what information for what purpose and how often. And feel free to modify this to meet your need. So thinking about what type of data do you have? So, thinking about your qualitative and quantitative data. Thinking about your qualitative data. Is it something that could be easily quantitated? So if you maybe want to do some affinity grouping, that is grouping your data into categories, perhaps counting the number of responses within a given theme. Or, do you have qualitative data that should be quantitated someday? So does it look like perhaps we need to change how we're asking a given question? So where are you getting your data from? What are your sources? And I've plugged in to here ones that are specific to my agency. So types of data that I have access to right now are some of our client-facing data with one of our divisions. The employee engagement survey, my area, the organizational development, we did an all-staff meeting survey to just gather feedback on what folks thought. So I have access to that data, and that's both qualitative and quantitative data. I also have my personal spreadsheet, and then I have access to a fair amount of Power BI data for different types of information, including hospital discharge data for our clients. Data that I might need someday are access to other division client data. I don't have a need right now, but that could be a need that I have someday. So think about, what do you need? There's access that you would like, but really, what do you need? And what do you have a business need for? And then going down to, how are you entering and retrieving your data? So for data entry, is it manual or automatic? Who might be entering the data? So I provided on the worksheet an example. So for our client-facing data, our social workers are doing a lot of the data entry. And then, remember, I'm thinking about how data is entered and retrieved. This speaks to the credibility and reliability of the data. It also speaks to the ease of obtaining the data. Data that is automatically retrieved is a lot easier to get at than data that you have to manually retrieve. And then finally, what are the tools and platforms? What are the tools and platforms that you have? And then not just what do you have, but what can you use? What are the platforms or tools that you need training in? And then what are some tools or platforms that you might need or want? So think about that. Before moving on, I just want to see if there are any questions about the workbook or anything that I've covered so far. I could maybe get some reactions if this is making sense, or you're like, yeah, I think I could use this.
See a thumbs up coming through.
Yeah,
Thumbs up.
see a chat and this is helpful. I will use this. Great. Making sense so far. Good stuff and useful. Awesome. Cool. I always want to check in sort of partway just to make sure that it's resonating with the audience, because if not, then need to pivot and adjust. Oh, fascinating tools. You're providing a gift. Oh, nice. We also talk a lot about slide decks, not telling the story using data. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay. So let's move on. Know about our data types. We've identified where our data comes from, how it's entered and retrieved, our data platforms. So now it's time to put together our story. We're going to spend a little bit of time here. This is sort of where a lot of the meat of our presentation is. So I love this quote by Danielle Kahneman. No one ever made a decision because of a number. They need a story. Okay, yes, some people might be driven by numbers alone, but better decisions are made because of a story. People remember data because of stories. If you aren't familiar with Daniel Kahneman, he's known for his work in behavioral economics, has co-authored books such as Noise, and a book that I'm reading right now, Thinking Fast and Slow. So if you like a heavy read, but fascinating, I recommend his work. So your components of an effective story include these three elements. First, it's relevant content. So from the visuals to the copy, that is your words and number, they need to support each other. And what you share needs to be suitable to your audience and their level of understanding on the topic. Your visuals need to help your audience understand what the data means. And your visuals and graphics also need to be appropriate for the data. So using the right chart and graph. And then your content also needs to ensure that your content is representative around diversity and that it is accessible. And I provided some resources in your handout in the workbook on some accessibility. And then you need to have good data. So your data needs to be from a reliable, reputable source. And that includes how data is collected and tallied. And your data needs to be presented in a truthful way that tells the whole story. And as a storyteller, you need to be objective with what the data is saying. So not just, cherry picking the good stuff. And then it needs to be relevant to your audience. So if your purpose is to present regional data, providing data only in aggregate or statewide really defeats your purpose. But you could compare how one region is doing to another, or comparing regional data to statewide. So basically benchmarking one against the other. And then a clear narrative. So this includes using plain language, avoiding weird jargon, confusing or unfamiliar acronyms. Again, this is audience dependent. So those closer to the source of the data, you're more likely to be able to use acronyms that your audience is going to be familiar with. But if it's for the public or say the legislature, try to avoid jargon, at least without an explanation, or acronyms, again, without explaining what they are. So narrative, provide an introduction to the data that you're about to share. It could be why we're sharing this data to this group. Other components could include the time frame or a specific population, if they are elements not included in the title of your graphic. Sometimes an introduction is useful when your chart title would be extremely long. And then your narrative also needs to include the so what. That is, what does this mean? So for comparison type charts, is there a difference between the groups? And if so, why? For line graphs, what is the change over time? And why are there significant changes between date periods? And then ending with a call to action. So tell your audience what you need from them. So we've got our basic components. Let's look at creating some structure. So to whom, this is where knowing your audience is critical. Think of your audience as your customer. The language you use will need to change based on your audience and your customer's needs. Generally speaking, when it's peer-to-peer, you can use more familiar language and speak in shorthand. If you're persuading mid-level managers, you want to try to prove your point, keep recommendations crisp and to the point, but also provide your resources and evidence. So have your raw data available, or that deeper dive data available if they ask for it. And then your executive level audiences. Again, get to the point and generally keep it brief. But most important is to know who the key decision makers are and how they like to receive information. What do they prefer? And if you don't know, ask. It's okay. Part of a lean culture is one where we ask questions of our customer. How do you like to receive information? How much detail do you want to have? Maybe provide a couple different options. Is this too much? Is this too little? It's sort of like Goldilocks, finding just that right balance of detail. Most, especially at the executive level, are not necessarily going to want to see that granular data. But it is important to have it ready and in an accessible format for those who want to drill down. For tables, in terms of accessibility, avoid merged cells. And then screen readers read tables from left to right. So try to have your column headers be more row-based than column-based, especially for complex tables. And try to simplify your tables if you can. If you know that a number of your audience members are using screen readers. And then the what. So this is your components, that content that we covered on the other side. So what data you share, what story you tell, again, it's really going to vary depending on your audience, not just from the amount of detail to the perspective, but also what to highlight. And that what drives the why. So why does this data matter to your audience? And again, this is really going to vary from customer to customer. So what's your goal? What do you need from your audience? Are you just informing them? Or maybe you're trying to influence them in some way. Do you need them to act or make a decision based on the data provided? Is this an exploratory presentation? Thinking about the what, or the if this, then what? Perhaps the data is inspirational, or to celebrate reaching a milestone or target, or it could inspire to do better. I'd like to think of strategic goal or strategic objectives targets as data to inspire. But I want to just point out that good data doesn't necessarily translate into good decisions. So you can't control necessarily what decision is made, but you can present the data in a way that tells a story that needs to be told, that might help influence the decision that needs to be made. I know, like, okay, I don't really play with data. Like, this is so far outside the scope of my job. Well, a lot of organizations, inside and outside of state government, underinvest in understanding the information, the data. So if you are a data owner, or if you are a data contributor, maybe you're someone who is doing the data entry, and you're more connected to the source of where that information is coming from. You need to help others understand it. And then finally, how often? The frequency of sharing data is also driven by your audience needs and data availability. So it's critical to share with your audience the frequency of how often your data is updated and made available in a shareable format, and for that data to be updated in meaningful ways. Like data might be updated daily, but is it meaningful every day? Are the minute changes that might be happening on a daily basis meaningful? So what's more realistic given the data input? The week updates could be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or quarterly. And again, it's okay to ask your key audience members how often they want to see new data. Again, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions. Yeah, designing visuals to be bilingual. Yeah, use the built-in table chart features within Microsoft PowerPoint rather than just doing a screenshot. Yeah, because then screen readers can't read it, and you'd have to have a pretty detailed alt text if you do. So it's okay, but you just need to make sure that if you do that, that you have a really detailed alt text of what is happening in the graphic. Yeah, I love the PowerPoint designer and accessibility checker for tools. Yeah, and the tab order. That is the reading order in which things flow. That's important to pay attention to as well. Talia, just thinking about it offhand, and Teresa, that might be a good thing to think about as a topic next year is accessibility and how we make our material information accessible to a variety of audiences with different needs depending on their functional abilities.
And I know who to call on for that.
Well, for some of it. I'm not an expert. I just have learned over the years of what works and what to avoid.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you.
Okay, so then bringing your data to life. Your story is going to be most effective when you blend data and words. that's when you're bringing data to life. It's bringing it all together. So thinking about who are the people behind the data? So who's impacted? Who is the data about? How are people being impacted? And as a client, staff, for the work that we do, it also could be caregivers, it could be the population as a whole. And then who is helping to move the needle in the right direction? I like to think of this as who are your heroes and adversaries? That is who's helping to advance and move things along in the right direction, or who or what is getting in the way. Who or what are your obstacles to moving the needle in the direction that you want to be going in? And then be curious. Why are the numbers changing? What's going well and why? Also, what's not going well and why is it not going well? And it's also important to share context. So what happened historically? What do we expect to happen in the future? Why and how do we know? Within ALSA, we know that we have an aging population. It's also known as an aging tsunami with where we're at with right now. Just the explosion in the growth and the number of people over 65, but particularly 85. And then why does this data matter? And then, you might have heard, oh, the data will speak for itself. Well, no, don't let data speak for itself because data as a standalone has no meaning. And it's our responsibility as owners of the data who know what the data means and why. It's our responsibility to tell our audience so they are not left guessing. And more importantly, we do not want to risk having them make up the wrong story. It's up to you to control the narrative. So I love this quote by Brene Brown. Maybe stories are just data with a soul. I think I saw in the chat earlier when I asked, what do you think of when data visualization? Just numbers, it doesn't matter, just sort of taking away the emotion out of it. And no, there should be, unless it's like actuarial forecasts, which I don't understand and just is like overwhelming to me. But even those probably have a little bit of a soul in all that forecasting. So let's go back to your workbook. So think about what is one story that you want to tell. Let me just get. So what is one story that you want to tell with your data? You don't need to put it in right now, but as we go through the rest of this workbook, think about that one story. And then think about that one story, who is your audience? And it's possible to have more than one audience group. So for that audience, for that collective audience, which group needs what level of information, sort of on that spectrum of bird's eye to granular. And then, what do you want your audience members to do? If it's decision making, who needs to decide what and by when? If informing, what are the takeaways? And then thinking about the frequency, how often do you need to update which audience groups? Do different groups need different frequency updates? The ledge, it's not on here, but, it might also be ad hoc. You're putting forward a bill and you're just like, what? Okay, we got to pull this together. And so that's where having stories ready to tell and data ready to go is really useful. So again, I don't expect you to get through all of this during our time here together. But think about, as you go back after today, think about these different aspects. All right, how much time do I have, Teresa or Talia?
Oh, you're doing good. You've
Okay.
got, yeah, you can continue if you like.
All right, awesome. So I want to spend the rest of our time here just looking at some different types of graphs and charts. Some are going to be really familiar, but others might be, I haven't seen that before. So, we talk about charts and graphs interchangeably sometimes, but I want to point this out, and I'm going to read it twice. All graphs are charts. Not all charts are graphs. I'm going to say that again. All graphs are charts, but not all charts are graphs. So a chart is a large set of information arranged in a visual way. A graph, on the other hand, is always going to show a mathematical relationship between two or more points. So a graph will always involve quantitative data. So a graph is simply a subset or a type of a chart. So you can say that a graph is a chart, but you can't say that a chart is a graph. And then just a quick note about pivot tables. You are limited, unfortunately, in what you can do with them. If you are using pivot tables, you're not going to be able to do things like histograms and Pareto charts, or funnels, scatter, bubble, sunburst, tree maps. But you can create the common types of charts like area, bar, column, line, pie, radar. Not a big fan of the radar. It's hard to read and understand. And you use pivot tables and then graphs from pivot tables so you don't have to create the same thing over and over. All you need to do, especially if it's coming from an automated source, is just refresh everything. You are able to, if you want to, copy a table and then paste it into an empty Excel cells and then create the other specialty charts, but you'll have to manually do that every time the data is updated. I want to talk about axes. Not these axes, these axes, the X and Y. I sometimes have a hard time remembering which is which. So several years ago, I created a mnemonic to help me remember. So for the X, it's lay down to relax. And then for the Y, reach up to the sky. So how do we know which one? Our graphs are going to show at least one of these types of either a composition, a comparison, a relationship, or a distribution. In the resources section, again, it's going to be in the workbook. I've provided a couple different resources for you on how to select the right chart or which chart to select. So pie charts, composition, they're common, but they're not necessarily the best at conveying accuracy. And a note about that in just a couple of minutes. They're generally pretty easy to understand for folks. You don't really need to explain how the graph works, which is always great. When should you use it? For single choice responses, when you want to compare a part to the whole, where the precise slice size doesn't matter. We're really bad as humans at distinguishing between, especially if the slices are fairly small, at distinguishing between, even with numbers, at distinguishing between the differences. When should you not use it? If there's a select all that apply option, do not use pie charts. You need to use it for discrete categories when only one option is possible. I also find that when I'm making pie charts, I need to do a lot of manual adjustment rather than relying on the automatic placement of data. A lot of times you get, especially if you have long text fields, it overlaps, it's just messy. So if you don't have a lot of time, I try to avoid pie charts. Also, if you have negative values, or if you're wanting to compare two sets of data in the same pie chart. Well, in my previous role, I also provided assistance with data creation. Had someone who was wanting to compare data between two facilities and to do that within the same pie chart. And she wasn't understanding why the graph wasn't working. And I'm like, well, it's because you're using the wrong chart. And so that's where knowing what chart to use for the data you have is important. Also, pie charts aren't good for changes over time. It's a static, it's a point in time.
Hey, Beth,
Yes.
real quick, I just want to just let you know that we're going to push our Q&A back for this session just to give you some more time. It looks like you got
Oh,
quite a bit of slides to work through.
okay. I can
So,
go through these quickly.
oh,
So,
sure. Yeah, we were just thinking
okay.
about pinging you around 11:45, 11:50
Okay.
to get Q&A started. Just want to make sure we got enough time for
That
folks
works.
to ask questions. Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
So I was attending a training on data viz several months ago, and the presenter shared this nugget about pie charts. A pie chart works well if you can understand the story without the data labels. You should indeed add the data labels. Like, we don't know what this, pie chart or donut chart from the 2021 Lean conference is saying. I think, if I remember correctly, it was like 94% or 98% saw that they had an enjoyable experience or something to that effect. So a pie chart works well if you can understand the story without the numbers. But again, you should indeed have the data label. So column or bar charts, again, these are pretty common. Your x-axis, again, that's the bottom relax, can be categories or dates, can show changes over time. And then your y-axis can be numbers or percentages. Excuse me. A bar graph, a bar chart is simply a column chart on its side. I like to use it when category names don't fit well in a column. Arrange the numbers either the smallest to the largest or largest to the smallest. The only time I wouldn't arrange by your total values would be if your categories were ages. I would then arrange the ages either oldest to youngest or youngest to oldest. All right, and then if you have too many, especially if you're doing a lot of stacked or clustered, it can be really fussy. And it's always better to use more than one graph if it's just too busy. People would rather see it broken out into multiple graphs than trying to tell the entire story in just one chart. Stacked, this is an example of 100% can be a composition. If it's not 100% stacked, it can be a comparison or relationship. Simple is better when it comes to stacked. I probably wouldn't go any more than 4 or 5. This is a really good example, I think, of a 100% stacked because you have a big change in your values, and you're really able to see that there's a story happening. Another variation of a stacked is just to do a single bar in lieu of a pie chart. So here you can easily see that 38% of staff saved over 5 hours a week by not commuting. Another variation of a bar chart is to do an overlapping bar chart to show a comparison between two groups. And then line graphs, it's another way to show a comparison or a relationship if you have more than one line. Your x-axis in a line chart will always be dates. And then here you're comparing one year against another, as well as having what the benchmark is. And then again, things to avoid with line graphs are lines that are just too bunched up against one another. If you do have your lines really bunched up, and the story is about like one line or one category in particular, consider having the non-storyline like in a gray tone or in a more muted tone, and the line that's telling the story of the category that you want to highlight, have that bolded or as a darker color, just to make it stand out. And then thinking about clustered relationships, you can do solid color, but you can also do color with pattern. patterns sometimes, especially if you're not sure if your colors are accessible. For those that might have color blindness, adding pattern to the color can be really useful in differentiating between the categories. And then histograms, it's similar to a bar and column chart, but it's where the X category, so again, it's that bottom category, gets continuous numeric values. So it could be age, it could be years. So any numeric, again, category where it's a flush. And it's plotted flush to show that it is continuous in nature. And then Pareto charts are another type of bar chart. It arranges data, the categories from largest to smallest. And then your secondary axis, that's the red line, that shows your percent of distribution. So by the time you get to your last category, you're at 100%. These are really useful when you need to prioritize where to take action. Or if action is taken, what percent of a population would be impacted without then needing to do a separate calculation. So here you can see that 70%, that's that yellow line on line 2, of this population has a cognitive performance score of 2 or greater. CPS, it's a score that is calculated when our social workers do our assessments, functional assessments. Another chart type is a stacked area chart. These can be really tricky to do effectively. This is a good example of how to do one. And I'm just going to go through the next couple of slides. And you have these in your handout. Nested shapes show subgroups within a larger population, that each smaller shape is just a proportion of the larger circle. I like these, the lollipop or the dot plot. They're just another way to do a bar chart. If you're doing Excel, the base of these is the scatter plot. They do take a fair amount of finessing. They can be really useful to do when you have lots of bars. It creates more white space, and you can put your category and data labels anywhere. It can be presented here, but you could also just have, especially if it's a short category, on your Y axis. Really just whatever works best for your space and your data and your labels. Comparison, dependency ratios, so like a butterfly or pyramid chart. These are other chart just examples that you can use, especially when comparing 2 different populations or 2 different groups. So this is a bit busy at first, but I think in terms of bubble chart skill, they can be really hard. It does a pretty good job. So the bigger the bubble, the more deaths there were for that type of natural disaster. Our world and data, I think, does a pretty good job of showing large amounts of data pretty effectively and using different types of charts. So they're a place that I go to if I want inspiration.
I'm gonna jump in super quick just to do a pulse check, because if there's no questions, I'm totally fine with letting you
Okay.
close us out. These are such good charts, and I just can't even tell you how much I love that you're giving us an example of so many different ways to capture and share data. Like you're answering like so many questions
Oh,
I've had in
thank
the
you.
past. So this is amazing. But yeah, I just want to give the audience a chance to ask a question in case anyone had a question about a chart or graph or a visual she previously shared. If so, you can enter it in chat or feel free to come off mute and ask a question. And any takers? Doug, yeah, question about the layout on slide 36.
Pretty
Go
sure it was
ahead and come off mute.
36.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So this one doesn't go most to least or vice versa, but would you maybe want to be highlighting one that you would put towards the center or something like?
So it looks like this is arranged alphabetically.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't see the order until you pointed it out.
It's
Yes,
hard to
yes.
see though, like this is not probably
Yes.
an example of I would probably do if I was the one that had ownership over this, I would probably do this as a bar graph rather than column, and I would arrange it either least to most or most to least. Just because, and also because the use of the negative space versus the negative white space versus the positive dark space with the non-white Hispanic
Mhm.
group, it sort of distorts it. And it's like, wait, should I be looking at this one? What's the story?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. Because I was thinking, are you trying to highlight something here? But it was not that intention. So, okay.
yeah, I don't think it was intentionally showing that this population. I think it's just because there was no space.
Mhm.
That's where they happened to put it. So I would have done a different graph type.
Well, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? All right, I'm seeing some keep going. Yeah, so in the resources section in your workbook, I can quickly jump there since there is a question about that. I have a whole bunch of different, so chart selection, some reading, some tips like what data viz experts wish they knew when they first started. It's a great article. These are all free access. Choose charts everyone understands. Good data won't guarantee good decisions. That's another good article. And then just some accessibility resources, especially around color. Visual suggestions when you occasionally have negative results or trends. Do you mean like the results are not, are more like that, ooh, this is like not good, or actual physical negative numbers?
Sounds like that's a question for Karen. Karen, with the lot.
Oh, actual results that go below 0. I would probably do, you could still do a bar graph. It was just that your y-axis, rather than starting at 0, you could have 0, but then have whatever your lowest value is, probably the largest whole number or whatever makes sense for your numbers. So you would just, yeah, or you, and if it depends. So you could have a matrix style chart where you have results that could go negative either on your x-axis or your y-axis. That's a good idea, though. I should include an example of that in an upcoming, the next time I present this. I present this on roughly a quarterly or a version of this quarterly for ALTSA staff. So oh yeah, that'd be a good poll actually, if we're able to just quickly do that. So I do pivots. I do a lot with Excel and pivot tabling because it's easy, it's accessible, and it fits the data source for me. So I think it really just, again, it's going to fit the type of data that I have. So I just want to show too, so these charts all show the same data, the number or percentage of projects by division. This is something that I pulled from my work. You know, so I could in theory use any of these, but some are just going to work better than others. You know, looking at this chart here, what do you think you would want to see if you were my boss, if you were my customer? What would work better for you? Would a Pareto chart, the bar chart on its side, the bubble chart, funnel, pie, or standard column? Looking Pareto, the center, bottom, Pareto or pie. I can tell we have a lot of lean folks in here because usually when I ask this, I get a lot of pie and maybe some bar. But yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, depends on the question being asked or needs to be answered. Good deal. But yeah, definitely more Pareto responses than others. I think a lot of folks have a hard time understanding what a Pareto chart is. It's much, I think we overcomplicate when we say, ooh, Pareto. It sounds like, oh, it's this big fancy thing. And it's not if you do a good job of explaining what it is. And it's especially useful if decisions need to be made, because then you know, like, where your impact is going to be or how many people could be affected if a certain decision is made. And then provide the takeaway. So tell your audience what that takeaway is. What is it you want them to know? And make sure you're not just cherry picking or telling a false narrative. So here, rather than having a chart title, I have an explanation of what that story is on the slide. And it is that being female is going to put you more at risk or a greater predictor of needing long-term services and supports or having a disability compared to living in a rural area or having a low income of $35,000 or under. And then your workbook, again, there's a section for you to check the types of charts and graphs that you want to use, and then, or that you're able to use, and what are things that you want to get better at, or what are the types of charts and graphs that you want to use at some point. And then just a quick note about formatting. I know I'm running out of time. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. I am monitoring that. And again, this is in your handout. So just some accessibility, provide raw data tables. The simpler the table, the better. Again, screen readers read tables from left to right. So just be mindful, avoid merge cells. I know have been guilty in the past of using complex tables to display information, so I'm getting better. Be sure to use alt text for everything. And then finally, how you talk about your data tables, graphs, charts to your audience is going to be important. So depending on your audience, you could need to be extremely descriptive or just a general overview. And then you'll notice that for a lot of my slides, actually for the entire presentation, I've used a dark theme background. It's because our colleagues in the Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing within ALTSA shared early on in the pandemic that it's easier to have slide presentations in dark mode for virtual gathering. I know for me, I just prefer it. It's just easier on the eyes. And then just again, mindful of how font types affect numbers and symbols. And then so some just take up a lot of space, some are more condensed. Be mindful of kerning. That's the amount of space between individual letters, symbols, words, characters. Oh yeah, I also found it's important to know your audience and atmosphere. Yeah, do you expect readers to study or glance? Yeah, at the visual reports. Do you want to capture the reader? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, avoid using acronyms and business specific references and abbreviations. And then, yeah, some fonts are just going to work better on a darker background. I shared this presentation. I checked using Are My Colors Accessible? I love this because it shows you what colors in your presentation can work on the other. So it shows you what colors in your presentation are going to work with what colors and what background. Fonts, love it. Can't recommend it enough. And it shows, it's hard to see here, but it shows that whether it's double A or triple A accessible. And then just my, when to change what, honestly, when you want to control how it looks, but particularly focus on when font is too small to read or there's no contrast variation or overlapping content. So questions, but also I'm just curious, what are your takeaways from today? So what's an aha moment that you had?
Can I interrupt really fast before folks type that in? This
Yeah.
is so great. so great. And so I feel like personally, I'm like, I want to hear more. You just did an amazing job putting this together. And I'm so sorry you had to rush through the end of it. So we did a quick poll, spur of the moment. Teresa's going to launch it right now.
Okay.
Just curious if folks want to dive deeper into this a little more with Beth at a later time. And I'll get with you on the back end, Beth, with some thoughts I have. But just do you want to hear more about this? Do you feel like you're ready to take off and go start creating all your data viz charts? How are you feeling about this? We definitely don't want to send you away like on the edge, still needing more. Hands-on learning to create charts as well. Okay. Yeah, like I saw a bunch of charts that you shared and I'm like, ooh, I want to know how to
We do
create
that. Yeah,
this.
like the oh, I can show the probably it was this one.
Thank you all for answering that.
Takes a little bit of time to put
Mhm.
together.
Yeah, so thank you all for doing this spur of the moment poll. That totally gives us an idea of whether or not we need to reach back out to Beth with some ideas we have to bring her back and engage with you all. And I like the hands-on because to me that says in person. So we can possibly talk about how we can work that out. So thank you all so much. It's exactly what we wanted to know.
Oh, see more
And
about storytelling. Okay.
yeah, I got a couple
Case study
minutes left if you
approach.
want to go ahead and close us out by answering a question. You may have time for one.
Oh, I feel better prepared to choose the right chart. Definitely more to learn. Oh, this was my oh, thank you. Yeah, I think being able to tell a case study, that would be, I think, a really good thing to do to show how a story developed over time, to sort of walk through the experience of that. And what happens when, conclusions, we misled, intentionally or unintentionally. Yeah, I like that. Very cool. Any questions? And I'm so glad I'm looking at the comments. I'm so glad that you all have enjoyed it and that you've had just good takeaways.
All right, I see. Have you partnered with IT staff to incorporate data capture into the visuals?
I have not. Our IT folks, I'm not sure if they get into that level of stuff. I know with some things IT gets involved with, but I personally have not.
Well, thank you. We have 1 minute left and yeah, can't say enough. This was wonderful, so helpful, and I look forward to hearing more.
Well, I love talking about this stuff, as you guys probably heard from just my voice and my excitement and the speed at which I talk. But yeah, I love helping others to become excited and passionate as well.
It shines through. We can totally tell you this is really your jam, and we
It
just
is.
thank you for sharing with us. We've learned so much, and we want to learn more. So again, we'll be working on something to get you back. But thank you all
Awesome.
for attending. Thank you, Beth, for an amazing presentation. Thank you all. We appreciate your engagement in the chat and in the workbook. Go take that workbook and
Take it to your team.
play with it and practice with it and take it to your team. Exactly. And then just be paying attention to our blast and our emails that come out from us, because you may hear something in the near future to really dive deeper into this and actually learn how to create some charts. So thank you all. Have a wonderful holiday if we don't hear from any of you before then. And yeah, go forth and conquer. See you later.
Happy
Bye,
holidays.
everyone.
Happy New Year. Thank you,
Bye.
Beth.